everybody. Welcome to Flipping the Barrel podcast, the podcast where we dive deep into the stories of energy leaders across our industry and find out more about their career and life journey. Today on the podcast, we have Stefan Faulk, the founder of Modern Tax Group and partner of Flipping the Barrel. Stefan is a visionary leader who balances ambition with heart, blending strategic thinking with a deep commitment to his team and clients. Over the past decade, he has built and managed a client portfolio of over 300 companies, including Fortune 100 and 500 firms, while assembling a powerhouse team that has delivered nearly $500 million in tax savings since founding Modern in 2014. His leadership has transformed the firm from a one-room office into an industry competitor to the Big Four, with a client retention rate exceeding 90%. You don't hear that very often. What drives him most is the opportunity to work alongside incredible people, fostering a culture where top talent thrives and work-life balance is championed. And we've worked with Modern for a few months now already, and we can see that when we talk to people in the company, when we get to talk to Stefan and just his team. And really, this isn't just like an intro, but we see it like this is real. And also, while he's inspiring his team as the CEO and running the company, he also loves spending time with his family. And Stefan is constantly driven by passion for innovation, excellence, and making a lasting impact. And so far, that's what he's done throughout his career journey and life journey as well. So, Stefan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, for saying yes. And we can't wait to hear a little bit more about you and just everything you've done with Modern over the last few years.
Massiel, Jamie, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Stefan. And just like Massiel had mentioned, it's been really incredible getting to know Stefan personally. So it comes with like a lot of heart to do this podcast with him. As a person, we do feel like he's just such a great leader, and knowing your journey, I think, makes you even more special. So our guests can get to know where you're from, Stefan. Let's start from the very beginning. You grew up in Dallas, Texas, a neighborhood full of fascinating homes and people of high class. You had doctors, lawyers, artists. But what's really interesting is you had few kids on your block. So naturally, you were drawn to forming friendship with adults. How did this unique experience and upbringing influence the way that you interact with people today? And what role did this play in shaping your perspective?
Yeah, I grew up in the part of Dallas called Lakewood. If anybody's from here, they probably know it. It's a really old neighborhood, one of the first in Dallas, and it was really a unique, interesting way to grow up. As you mentioned, I didn't really have a lot of kids on my block, and all those that were there at the time were quite a bit even older than my parents, but they were all very interesting people. People that had really interesting life stories. You know, some grew up very poor, some grew up wealthy, most were pretty successful, and worked in all different industries. As you mentioned, doctors, lawyers, people that owned real estate. And that really sort of forced me into a position in a way that I had to interact with people kind of above my weight class. And that really, I think, early on kind of put me on a trajectory to see things from a different perspective. And you know, sort of having to communicate with adults, not kids. It was. I don't know that it was always that much fun at the time, but later on, I think it was one of those things that really helped me gain an understanding for how people's minds work.
You were pretty much getting prepared to be CEO without knowing you would ever run a team or, lead a company this way. But it's interesting how we look back at, our childhood and how that impacts literally who we become in the future. And part of that was, you told us about this story, and I thought, we need to have it on the podcast because it's such a big part of just your journey and who you are and your identity today. But it was, at 16 years old, you had just left a young ski trip, you had finished like an awesome weekend, and you came home to the news that your dad had been laid off from work. And at that time, your dad's job for the family and for himself was a big deal in terms of his identity to the company. He had been there for, I think 2+ decades already at that time. And it's really normal that even you as a child are in that family where you felt like very connected to this company because it's it becomes personal, right? Even the identity around it. And you even said that you thought maybe one day you would work there. And I think this is a story that's it's common for definitely in the industry where we work in, where there's quite a bit of layoffs, et cetera. And so tell us a little bit about when you got the news from your dad, where it was just kind of like a rude awakening for you in that moment of you not being tied to that company anymore and your dad's career coming to an end in that specific company. Can you tell us a little bit about just that instance and kind of what went through your mind and how that's shaped you into who you are today?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I actually just saw your post on LinkedIn today, as there's tightening within your industry. People that are doing a great job are still losing their job. And to some degree, that's life and that's the economy. For me, at that particular point in time, it was kind of a sort of loss of innocence in a way. Because when I was 16, it was my dad had the same job as the day that I was born. It just felt like a permanent fixture. It was that was part of our identity. And I think that that's probably true of many people, out there. And again, my dad did everything right, and it still happened. And just as you pointed out in your post today, that that's happening to people all over the place. Um, Depending on what phase of life you're in, I think that the effect is going to impact you differently. I mean, everybody here talking here today on this podcast, we're all parents, right? And there are things that we want our kids to be exposed to and see because that's part of life and it helps them develop. There's things we don't want them to see, at least depending on where they are in that phase. Um, this was I think the right time, for it to happen to me because I was old enough to gain some level of understanding that there's sort of no guarantees in life, and you have to do the best that you can to plan around those. Whether that's at the company now, we could do everything right for a client, and it doesn't mean they're going to stay. There are things beyond your control. So I would always suggest that people try to control the things that they can, plan out as far as they can, um, and just understand that some of these things happen, but it's sort of how you rebound from that.
Yeah, it's such an impactful moment in your life to experience that still at a young age. I do feel like if you could pick a good time, it was then, as far as you understanding what your parents were going through, but it was still challenging, and it kind of married into you still trying to understand your journey, where you were going and what you wanted to do and what your purpose was. And after seeing something like that happen to your father, I know that can be even more challenging. There's a lot of people, a lot of our listeners are going through this today, like Massiel's post, but also those people that are getting laid off have kids too, and they're going to be experiencing the same thing. um, and while you were going through this, you were also trying to decide like where you wanted to go to school and what you wanted to do. And you were getting swayed in all different directions. You initially planned that you wanted to join the military, but your uncle encouraged you to take a different path. And then you applied for an out of state college and you got in. However, like many of us, out of state college costs more because in state is usually cheaper. And then that ultimately became another challenge for you. And you ended up having to leave that out of state college and then eventually go to a community college. So you were transferred again. So you were going through all these different things in your life at this time, and nothing was really stable because you were having to move different schools, which means meeting new people. We see this a lot, and we think it encourages some people to take a higher path. And for you, I feel like it really kind of developed that entrepreneur side of you. You had to adjust so many times. Can you tell us about these experiences, and going through this trial and error at that age and period in your life, how that kind of helped you today manage a successful business and team?
Yeah, I mean, to like kind of jump to the end, it just made me really light on my feet, and able to pivot. There were a lot of things that came down the line that I wasn't expecting, but it's sink or swim, and so I had to figure it out. I didn't necessarily through all those, I mean, what you just described was probably a 6 to 7 year period of time, from kind of middle teenage years through college, and to some degree thereafter. But I was never one of those people that was like, um, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to get involved in tax. Or, I mean, the one thing as you touched on there is I was always interested in the military, and as a point of reference, when I was graduating high school. When I was a junior in high school, 9/11 happened. When I was a senior, we were invading Iraq. And so it was a pretty contentious time, and I didn't have an issue with that, but I think some of the family that I had was pretty scared. Um, and my uncle suggested, like, hey, why don't you just give college a shot? Um, and if you don't like it, you can just drop out, and go to the military. But it's kind of hard to go the other way around. And that's a oversimplification of that conversation, but I that's what I decided to do. Through that process, from my dad being laid off just a couple years before, and he had started work again, but um, I mean, we were just not in a position long term. I could tell that we were not in a position long term to sustain the tuition at the school that I was going to. My parents never said anything, but I could just sense it, and I wasn't getting enough out of it to justify what they were putting into it. So I made that decision to leave, um, and thought I would just shoot right into an in-state school. Turns out a lot of those credits don't transfer, and it's highly competitive. I was pretty naive about how all of that worked. So I jumped into community college, and that was just one of the most amazing experiences. Those are still the best teachers I've ever had. And so, I wouldn't change a thing about how any of that shook out or happened. It it was an incredible experience.
I love how it's not a one size fits all in terms of like schooling or what you want to do in that like teen to early adult when you're trying to figure out your career, etc. And another thing that I find really interesting, and I'm glad you mentioned about like you didn't necessarily have a direct path where you're like, I want to be a doctor or I want to work in tax. And it's something that I think I used to think of people that were successful. It was like, you wanted to be a CEO since you were born. You mean you didn't want to be an entrepreneur when you were born, you know? And it's as we've interviewed so many people on the podcast, a lot of the people who get to the success that you get to, they didn't necessarily have a direct path. They were just kind of trying things out and exploring and being curious about different opportunities. So it's really interesting that you mentioned that too. When we spoke to you and we were kind of going over your story and stuff, this is the one that I was super excited about listening on, was the hike that you decided to do in the Appalachian Trail. And it was kind of very random in the middle of the story, but it's such a monumental piece to when you look back at your journey of like something that you did for yourself, that you finished, that you accomplished, even though it was emotionally overwhelming and extremely challenging. And it was one of those where you even mentioned that you called your dad during the hike and just through the days and like, hey, like this is hard, I don't think I could finish this, because sometimes emotionally you want to just tap out and get out from the challenge that you told yourself that you would do, but your dad really pushed you and you felt like, I need to finish this also for your dad, right? Can you tell us a little bit about how did you come to the conclusion of wanting to do this? And then for those who have no idea what this trail entails, give us a little bit of background, like how long does that take? What was the most challenging part of it? And how did it feel when you finally ended it and kind of achieved this one thing that you told yourself you would do? No matter how challenging it was, you got through it.
Yeah, sure. So this was kind of like a lot of the things that happened to me in that span of several years there. It just sort of fell upon me. So with the change from one school to the next, that sort of protracted things. So I graduated about a year and a half later than I would have had I just stayed on the traditional 4 year path. So that plopped me right in the middle of 2008 or the end of 2008. And for those listening that are younger, that was a really challenging time to graduate, and be looking for a job. There really weren't any. Um, And so I didn't really know what I was going to do, or even what I wanted to do. So I I was at my parents' house. I graduated December 2008, and I I my dad always had this subscription to National Geographic, and I picked up this magazine, and in that magazine was this article about the Ozark Trail, which is in Arkansas, and it's like this, I don't know, a few hundred miles, and takes like 2 or 3 weeks, and I was like, wow, that looks really cool. So I went to the local outfitter, and was looking at like hiking backpacks and boots and all the gear and everything, and the guy that was working there was like, "Well, what kind of hike are you thinking about doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I saw this thing on the Ozark Trail, you know." He's like, "Oh yeah, that's a cool one." He's like, "Have you ever thought about doing the full AT?" And I'm like, what is that?" And he's like, "The Appalachian Trail." And I'm like, "Ah, I've heard of that. Like, how long is it?" And he was like, "Well, it's about 2,200 miles, and it goes from Georgia to Maine." And I was like, what? How long does that take? And he was like, about 6 months. And I I didn't buy anything. I went home and I like got on the internet and I started looking at it, and I just became obsessed with the idea of doing it. And so I worked like some odd jobs in college and summer jobs and things like that. And so I had few $1,000s saved up, and I asked my I asked my parents. I guess I was maybe still young enough to do this. I asked my parents for some of the gear for Christmas and like the backpack, and they bought it for me. And then like 3 months later, I was on the trail, um, and I was like woefully unprepared. Um, I thought like, oh, I'm in pretty good shape, like go out there and do this, and I had way too much stuff, and I was not in as good of shape as I thought I was. Uh, so, day one, it was March 29th when I started, and day one got out there. It was pretty cold. Started in Georgia. My dad dropped me off at the trail, and gave me a hug, um, and I was off. And by the end of that first day, I was just like beat down. I was just so tired, and I'd probably gone about 10 miles or something like that. And day two, I woke up, had some blisters on my feet, and by the end of day two, it's kind of like when you work out. It's like it's really not like that next day. It's like the day after,
Yeah,
right?
when
Two
you
days
feel
after, when your
everything.
body is just. And I just had, I mean, my boots weren't broken in. I was carrying about 55 to 60 pounds in my pack. And like people think, oh, I can squat like 200 pounds or whatever. It's not the same when you're in the mountains, and you've got boots that are like stiff as a board and all those things. And by the end of day three, I was just like, I don't think I can do this. Um, I'm not even like, when I looked at the map, I'm like still at where like the dot is that shows the beginning. Um, and so I had really bad blisters, and I jumped off the trail. I got a motel room so I could like take a shower and like pop blisters and buy some band-aids in town and like all that stuff. And I called my dad and I was like, Dad, I don't know if I could do this. And he really didn't say much, but he was just like, you just need to put your mind to this and do it. Um, and I hung up the phone, and I thought about it, and I thought about how my dad had told, he was so proud of me, like going on this journey. He had told literally everyone. And I don't mean like all of our friends and all of our family. I mean like the cashier at the grocery store, like walking the dog, some random stray, oh, like everybody. And I'm like, kind of like under a lot of pressure here. And I really just like, I just kept going because I didn't want to let him down. Um, and then I got into the groove. Like I figured out my pack, my boots broke in, my feet got harder, like all those things. And then um, it just, it, it became like truly like a quest. Like it was cool to then, once you're like 500 miles in and you're in like 4 states later, right? And you look back at the map and you're like, whoa,
Whoa, yeah.
I just hiked,
Mhm.
walked all the way through 4 states, right? And so then it gets exciting.
Mhm.
And you meet, I mean, just the most incredible people. Um, and it ends in Maine, and I finished in October, and my parents met me up there, um, and got to the got to the summit, Katahdin. That's the end. And it's, everything just looks like it's on fire because it's October in New England and all the trees are orange and red. Um, and I got off and finished, and I was like, well, now what do I do? I was kind of hoping the economy would be better, like in 6 months, and it wasn't. Uh, and so it just started another period of like, okay,
What's
now
next?
what? Yeah, exactly.
I think what's really important about this journey that you went on is your attitude, and this is what we kind of saw through your whole entire career, but also just personally and professionally, how you have changed kind of the way that you look at everything. And you're like, okay, I can do this. I will do this. I will get to this. And we see that with a lot of entrepreneurs, especially like what your dad said when you called him, like, hey, it's all a mental thing. It's all in your mind. And then once you surpass that and you get over that mental block, like there's nothing you can't do. We want to kind of dive into that a little bit and let's talk about like business strategies because you developed Modern, you are a founder of the company. What are some instrumental things that you have learned, running Modern for the last 10 years, but more importantly, like advice for the listeners that are thinking about like, I want to start something, but they have that mental block of like, oh, but who's going to think about this? Or, so-and-so doesn't think I can do it, or, whatever it might be. Kind of like how your dad had all that pressure on you because he told everybody that you're going to finish the trail. What are some strategies or any advice that you can give to those listening on, really getting started on, what they see as an opportunity for them?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to be really candid about this. Okay. Um, Once things really started working at Modern and like the entrepreneurial risk had paid off, okay, and we'd reached critical mass and we're chugging along. Um, I I don't want to say I made the mistake, but I learned that like you really can't encourage people to be entrepreneurs. And so I kept like looking around at people. I'm like, wow, that's a really talented person, like in whatever their field was. I was like, why aren't you doing this for yourself? Like, do this for yourself. It's never worked. Like, it's never worked. As opposed to the person who is like fanatical, who's like, and it doesn't mean that their business is going to work out. Again, like nothing's guaranteed. Nothing's guaranteed for me here today. But like the person who is going to be an entrepreneur is the one that you is defying everybody and it's like I don't care what you say, like I believe in this, I'm going to go do it. Okay, that doesn't mean that there isn't advice, but I just want to be clear that like I personally have never successfully encouraged someone to start their own business. um and so I don't do it anymore unless they're coming to me seeking advice like, hey, I'm gonna do this. They're not asking it, they're just saying like, I'm gonna do it, like what advice do you have? So my number one advice, the number one thing I would advise, you probably hear this like it would almost be the same advice as if you're remodeling a house. Take whatever your budget is and double it, right? And so I would be as well capitalized as I could be. And I would have a very, very clean back office. So your sort of finance and accounting, like, because if you could be, you could have an amazing idea. If you run out of money, like you're dead in the water. We happen to be in a particular type of consulting, like not all of our fees, but much of our fees are success based. Well, we have a very long period of time that we have to go before we can show that success to the client. And so inherently from the beginning, I knew that we had to be well capitalized because even if we were developing business at an amazing clip and bringing the work in and doing the work, it was going to take a long time to get to the finish line to be able to display the result. And so I think the number one thing that we see, even in businesses that are running, but one of the number one things that we see is that they're, a lot of these people are not well capitalized, and they just can't get off the ground. So that would be my number one advice. Well capitalized, very clean back office. And then the next thing that I would do, even if you're never ever going to sell your business, is design your business as if you're going to sell it. And so the reason I say that is it will develop better processes. So if everything is, um, we have a phrase that we use around here, teachable, repeatable, scalable. Okay. So if it meets those criteria, then you can get to the next tier of your business. Um, those basic criteria, like they have to be met. If everything is a one-off, you'll never be able to scale beyond yourself. So that's also going to produce a better result, a more consistent result, better customer service, all of those things that are critical to running a good business.
I love that advice. And I actually really like the fact that you said, I'm not going to try to tell people what to do anymore on entrepreneurship, because just when you mention that, sometimes you see people, you're like, you should be doing this for yourself. Like, why aren't you starting? Like, you've got this. Like, why don't you do this? But to your point, like, it really needs to come from the person. They need to be the ones that see that challenge and want to go solve it. It doesn't come as naturally as we think. So that's good advice. And also, it doesn't always work out. So entrepreneurship isn't meant for everybody, and like the risk levels that they could take and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've been very fortunate. Um, this is personally my first business, and it worked. But it, it could have just as easily not worked. I don't think that that means that I wouldn't have tried it or something else again, right? And that's what I mean by that, like fanaticism. You, you like you can't keep that person down, right? And they're
Yeah.
going to seem like they're crazy. Maybe it's your spouse, and maybe they are crazy, but um, but yeah, you're not going to. A long, long time ago, my friend's mom said something to the two of us, me and my friend, and it sounds like an oversimplification. But I've found through so many experiences that it was very good advice and very true. And that she said, you think that people think like you do, but they don't. Um, and so, yeah, that's kind of the lesson that I've learned. And, I don't think that there's no shame in like not being an entrepreneur, right? Um, I think that there's something really amazing. Like when we talk to some of our clients and I see that our point of contact has been at a company for 28 years or something like that, I'm like, that's a really beautiful thing. Um, that person potentially is really satisfied with what they do. It probably means they're really good at what they do, and it probably means that they work at a really good company. And I think that satisfaction is ultimately what people should be seeking, not just to be sort of independent or doing it for yourself. I would just focus on being happy.
I love that. I think that's so right. It's just more of like the purpose that you are fulfilling that aspect of it and being happy with what you're doing, whether that's a career or entrepreneurship, etc. But I'm intrigued now on just the journey to modern, right? Because you finished the trail, you finished college, you're still kind of figuring out what to do. You had some odd jobs in between there. And then if I remember correctly, you had like a recruiter call you for two jobs. One was like, I think selling wine or something along like the wine industry, or this tax company. And you didn't know anything about taxes. At the beginning, we thought, you did something in taxes to start a tax company, but you didn't. It just it was like faith that got you into this as you went and actually got the second job, not the wine one, you got the tax job. And this is where I find the story super interesting, is that everything that job entailed when you got into it is kind of like the catapult to modern, and you deciding with coworker that worked with you to go out and try this thing on your own, where you were going to have very similar business and you learned it by going to the company, but you were going to try to be like the complete opposite of the culture and the work environment that you got by working there. And so I find it so interesting that you went in and started off something very similar in the same, let's say, industry, but you took all the bad experiences and you converted it to what modern is today, which is all of the positive things that you want to do. You want people to feel happy at work, people to have a voice, to get well compensated, etc., just because of your bad experience. So can you tell us a little bit about once you got started to work at that company, and just, I think there was like a taco story that I really want you to mention, but just to really show people how difficult it was to be there and how you pretty much were like, this, I saw the writing on the wall and you decided to leave.
I'm gonna leave the taco story out for now. We'll do that on round two. Um, yeah, I mean, look, one of the great things about uh, working for someone else is that you get to you have an opportunity to learn the things that they do right and the things that they do wrong, right? And so, um, uh, like, I mean, this is a really broad brush stroke. Like, I encourage people to, that are that that person that is already wanting to be an entrepreneur, right? Uh, like working for somebody else is not a bad thing. Like it is a learning experience. And so uh, working there, that in combination with all the things that had happened to me throughout my life and happened to my family, whether it was my dad losing his job, I mean, that was sort of the catalyst is that I could see that I was now working for someone that I was potentially writing the exact same chapter, right? Like, I think that I was just a cog in the machine. And I wanted to take control of that. Um, and so there were, things they did right. There were things they did wrong. Other places I worked, things they did right, things they did wrong. And even just like the way that I grew up. With a lot of these interesting people and interesting architecture around me. My mom was a interior designer and an architect, and so there was always just like this kind of creative thing going on in my house. And I just felt like there was an opportunity to put all of that together. We worked in a very like sterile industry, like taxes. Boy, like I mean, what would you rather talk about? Pretty much anything, right? And the people that were in it looked like they worked in tax, right? And these consulting firms, the website looks like it's a tax. Like it's boring. It's boring. Um, just so happens that we work on the most exciting version of tax. But with that said, I was like, there's such an opportunity here to, in some ways, even though we're called modern, it's really kind of like tapping into a lot of the things that existed 60, 70 years ago in terms of how businesses treated people and customers. And that was with that long-term mindset, right? Like you thought you were going to be at the company forever, you'd get a pension, like all those things. And we just don't see that anymore. Everything's like very transactional and things are really looked at like day to day, almost like hour by hour basis. And so I was like, what if we could create a place that looked different, felt different, and through that, I mean, just good customer service, great place to work, fun place to be. I got to be up here every day. I want to be around people that inspire me to come to work and work hard. And I think that that's what we built.
So one thing that we haven't really discussed is, and I don't even know if we've asked you this, is how did you come up with the name Modern? And then on the flip side too, how is it related to the oil and gas industry? Because I'm sure a lot of people listening are like, okay, you're interviewing somebody in tax. How is that related to energy? And there's actually a lot of relation between what you do and your clientele, and how important it is for the energy industry. So can you tell us a little bit about why the name Modern, and then also how y'all are helping the oil and gas industry and how you got into the energy related side of tax?
Yeah. So, for some of the aforementioned reasons, like I really felt that we could create something that looked different, felt different, right? And even performed, maybe most importantly, different. Um, Most of the firms that were out there were also um, uh, started by baby boom generation, really kind of the pioneers in the space. And so when we started, when Heath and I, one of my partners here, Heath Sutton, when we left and started Modern, um, we were probably like the youngest in the industry by, I don't know, 15, maybe like 20 years, would be like the next closest peer that we had. Um, and Since then, more people have started their own firms, which is great to see because that competitiveness just makes the industry better. But that was really much of the thinking behind the name, um, something that was fresh and different. And so, and I'm sorry, Jamie, I forgot the second part. Oh, energy. Yeah. So we work on two things: business personal property tax and real property tax. Okay. And for those that don't know, the best way to think about business personal property tax, depending on the state that you're in, we're not dealing with like the IRS or anything like that. This is a state and local tax matter. So, like, if you were a homeowner and you get that property tax bill in the mail at the end of the year, and you're looking like, where's all this money go? Uh, this for a business, they pay property tax on their fixed assets, meaning like machinery, equipment, vehicles, things like that, and inventory that's for resale. So in your space, like tubular goods, valves, right? All that inventory that maybe like a service company might sell or something, that's all taxed, just like your house is taxed. And so what we do is we work on the value and negotiate lower values for our clients so that ultimately they pay less money to property tax and reduce their operating expense. You're in the energy space is it's a capital intensive space. It's very, very expensive to develop new business, right, or serve business in your space. So if you're a service company or something and you win a big contract, bigger than you've ever had, generally speaking, the only way that you can serve that business is to go buy more equipment. Okay, well, you've just increased your operating costs, right? Um, and you also know in your space, like if that equipment's not out in the field and running, you're not making money, right? And so it's a natural fit for what we do. There's really an opportunity to negotiate on behalf of our clients, reduce their operating costs, and take that money that would have otherwise gone to tax and return it to shareholders, use it for new projects. Sometimes, quite literally, I mean, Massiel, just like your post today, literally keep people on the job because you're not paying the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in property tax um, that you would have otherwise paid without us. So, I mean, we've literally had clients say, because of what you guys did, we got to keep people on board that we would have had to let go. And it's a very rewarding thing to hear.
Yeah, no, thank you for running us through that. And I think at the end, we should say it on the podcast, but with Modern being a partner of FTB, this is definitely something that we want the community to know. If you are a service company, et cetera, and you're looking for tax, you know who to call because they really are the best in the industry, and we love partnering with you guys on that. Um, and just to continue the podcast into the next question is, you know, just looking back at your journey with how many ups, downs, different trials, different challenges, different directions and pivot points to starting Modern. The start of Modern wasn't easy. There's been a lot of challenges from the start, and now a full 10-year journey, right? So just over the years, lots of different things coming your way. How have you been able to manage the stress of being a business owner, the entrepreneurial life? Plus, you got married early on, you have two children. How do you balance all of that where you make sure that you could be present at home, especially, our new generation. You definitely want to be a present dad. Dads are very involved in what the kids are doing, etc. But you also, you're the face of this company and you are the leader and everybody's looking up to you. So how do you just manage both of those very high expectations of being a father, but also a business owner?
Yeah, I mean it's this is kind of like a chicken or the egg question, right? Like to be able to spend time with your kids and put a roof over their head, you got to go to work. But then also to like be a good dad or a good parent, like you got to be there for them. Um, my, uh, I was thinking about this actually coincidentally the other day, on the parenting side. So my kids are, I have a 2.5-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son. Um, and so they're still pretty young, right? And there's some concepts that they're not at a phase that they can totally grasp just yet. Um, when I was growing up, my dad, the business that he was in, oh, he was a sales rep and he was on the road a lot. And so my dad might be gone, 3 days and home 2, and then gone 10 days and home 5. And um, the conclusion that I came to as I was thinking about this the other day is that even though my dad was physically gone a lot, he was emotionally available. Um, and you know, at the end of the day, when he got back to his hotel, he would call us, right? When he worked for a European company through that period, and like so he'd have to go to Europe sometimes. And this is back, I know people like some of the younger listeners or viewers, like they're not even going to understand, the ones that haven't heard a dial tone in their life. Um, like calling home was actually expensive. Long distance was actually expensive. And so, but he still did that. And so even though my dad was physically gone a lot, we were very close and I felt his love. And so I mean there are many, many times where many days where the I only get to see my kids for a few minutes in the morning. So a lot of times my daughter's not even awake. I take my son to school every day, and that's 15-minute ride where we really get to just have fun and like cut up on the way to school. And then, see them. Sometimes I don't get to see them before they go to bed. But a lot of times I maybe get to see them for an hour. And the things that I've put in place there is again that like emotional availability. I think that one of the really damaging things today are when parents are actually physically present, but not emotionally present. They're looking at their phone or they're answering an email or a work call. And I get it, like that kind of stuff happens, but like we're definitely really bad about it, right? And if you can just give your kids 30 minutes of like your truly undivided and like go play in the dollhouse and like do all those things, then that's kind of all they need. Like they just need to know that you're there for them and you love them, right? And you're tuned into them while you're physically there. Uh, so yeah, it's a challenge, and like I think it's a big challenge for households where both parents have to work. And I mean I use that term have to, like they couldn't get by unless both. There's a big distinction between choosing and having to do something. Um, and for everybody that I've ever talked to that works here or that I've known in my life, that are close with their parents, it seems like that was the one constant. And I heard this a lot in the event, uh, the event that you had. Gosh, when was that now? October? Uh, yeah, I a lot of those stories, right? Like mom, dad left, mom was raising us, and she was working her butt off, but I knew she was there for me, and like I knew she loved me and all those things. It doesn't mean that some of those other aspects of life aren't challenging, um, but there was that emotional availability.
It's so interesting what you said, because when you're talking about even just like being there physically, but being on your phone or whatever it might be, we've had the same conversation in our household too, because you can be home all the time, but if you're not emotionally connected, then like what's the point of being home? Like you can say, I'm with my kid all day long. Yeah, but are you really with your kid?
Right.
So I think the way that you had described it is so important. And yeah, you might be physically gone at work all day, but when you're home, you're actually home and you're physically and emotionally with your child, which to your point, like they don't need a lot. They just need to know that you're there. So
Yep.
I think you really said that beautifully and like really gave a good summary of also the struggles that we deal with as parents. To end the podcast, we can't walk away without this question, because so many people, and you were here, like I'm sure every listener has heard this throughout their life and still today, is like, do not go in business with friends or family, right? And the other gentleman that you work with, Heath, and David, who you started Modern with, they're, y'all are all friends. And like I said, you're told not to go in business with them. However, you did, and obviously, it's been a success. What do you think is a key to having that type of relationship where you can, build a business together? Because there's a lot of things that and struggles through those 10 years that y'all have had together. That was there any time where you had to talk about something that was a little bit more difficult because you are, friends as well? What challenges did y'all have to overcome? And like, is there one key advice that you can give to those who want to do business with somebody and maybe it is a friend or a family member?
Yeah, don't, right? I would say that's still actually really good advice. But again, like going back to this fanaticism, like if you're going to go down that path, no matter what, I think that you have to accept at the very beginning that you very well like could lose that person. They may not, you may get to a place where like you aren't friends anymore. Um, but Modern was just a little bit different than that. Heath and I were really sort of more acquaintances when we started. We worked together. We hadn't known each other very long, but we were both in the same place emotionally. Like we were ready to get out and go do something. Um, and David uh, has been in a friend of the family longer than I've been alive. He's my dad's age. We weren't we were close, but we weren't I wouldn't describe David as like my best friend or something. What's really unique is that it tends to go this other way around where like you start the business with your best friend and then you end up hating them. Um, but this was more of a we knew each other, but we actually kind of became best friends in the business. Um, I think that that's for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons that I think that that was really able to work was because each of us had a complementary skill set. We weren't three of the same kind of person. And so um, David managed the back office and is our CFO. Heath is the lead consultant and COO, and I was, there to develop business. And so each of us had our respective skill set, and that complementary relationship, I think, allowed us to thrive and actually get closer to each other.
I love that. And, for our listeners too, Massiel and I, when we started Flipping the Barrel, we only knew each other for 3 months. And it's so funny because I'm sure y'all get this too, Stefan, is people think we've known each other for like decades. You're like, oh, y'all must have been friends before. And no, we actually became best friends through starting Flipping the Barrel. So I think it really says a lot about you and those that you work with, for y'all to have that close connection and to develop that while y'all were building the business. We just want to say thank you, Stefan, for coming on the podcast, for being a partner of FTB, for sharing your journey with us. And we just were so intrigued when we got to know you and meet you, and loved everything that you went through in your life. I think is a testament to one of those stories where you're like, wow, like he went, like there's so much challenge that you overcame and you still were able to be successful today. And I think stories like yours are the ones that inspire our listeners the most. So thank you again for sharing your time with us today. And we really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Jamie Massiel, thanks for having me.
Thank you. And if you like this podcast, please like, subscribe, leave us a comment, leave us a message. Email us at www.flippingthebarrel.com is our website. Email us at flippingthebarrel@gmail.com for any questions, resumes. We're always taking in people looking for jobs. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll catch you on the next podcast.